Hi, it's Melanie Goodhue from Pulse Wealth Management, and I have the pleasure once again to be joined by Jennifer Reynolds, owner of Fresh Legal. In fact, I don't think I mentioned that in our last video. If you're watching and you missed our last video, we talk about kind of a sensitive topic, but a reality for apparently 50% of Canadians, and that's, hey, if I'm getting separated, what are the steps that I should take to prepare and protect myself? And also, what is the process if I decide to go down that route? So if that's something that you've been curious about, please go back and watch that video. So thank you, Jen, for joining me today. Today, we are going to talk about prenups, marriage contracts, cohabitation agreements. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for chatting again.
My pleasure. So, Jennifer, what is a prenup? Is it different than a marriage contract? And is it different than a cohab agreement?
So a prenup is the most commonly used word, I think, that people use to refer to what we call in the legal world a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement. So in Ontario, you can enter into a contract at any point in your relationship. So it doesn't have to be done before you get married. You can enter into a cohabitation agreement with somebody that is a common law partner or spouse, or into a marriage contract with someone that you're legally married to or going to be legally married to, that sets out what your rights and your obligations are if you separate in the future. So it can speak to spousal support, what people call alimony, and it can speak to the division of your assets and your debts. It cannot speak to the custody, parenting time, and decision-making regarding your children, but it can speak to their education and their religious upbringing.
Okay. Now, I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind, based on that, because I think that's something a lot of people don't realize is that you can set up these contracts at any point, not necessarily ahead of time. So can you talk about a little bit about that? So, if I'm married at this point and all of a sudden 6 years in, I want a marriage contract, what that means, does that mean that the last 6 years are, going to be, if at some point we were to divorce, does that mean that the last 6 years are just going to be divided how it normally would go, and then everything from here on out it goes with the marriage contract, or how does that work?
That'll depend on the terms of the contract that you have in place, right? So you would work with a family lawyer to get advice about what works for your financial situation. We'll ask questions about why you want the marriage contract or the cohabitation agreement in place, what your goals are. And in some situations, we might say, well, let's freeze everything as of today or share everything up to this point and not share going forward.
Mhm.
Or let's look at your entire relationship, and the prenup might address the entirety of the relationship.
That's interesting. Very good information. Thank you. Now, why would you want a prenup? And why might someone not really need it or go forward with it?
So prenups, typically we see people getting them to protect their financial situation.
Mhm.
Different examples that might hit home or sound familiar for people watching this and your clients are they might have a business, a family business perhaps, that's been the family for generations. Your interest in that business, your whether it's a direct legal interest or a beneficial interest that is built during the relationship, is an asset that would be shared upon separation, and you might want to protect that. You might want to keep that aside. You might be willing to share the value of the business, but want to make sure that the actual legal ownership and shares are protected. You might even have a shareholders agreement in place that says all the shareholders have to have a marriage contract in place with particular wording and clauses in it. So if you are a shareholder in a small business, taking a look at your shareholders agreement before you move in with someone or get married is important. You might be buying a house. This is super, super common these days with the intergenerational wealth transfer. Parents are giving larger and larger gifts or loans to children to help with down payments.
Right.
And you might want to speak to what happens to that chunk of money.
Mhm.
Or you might just be putting different amounts of your own money in and want to divide the house unequally.
Mhm.
And then a third thing that people should be aware of is that in Ontario, the house that you live in on the date that you separate is called your matrimonial home.
Mhm.
And it is a big exception to the general idea when you're dividing property that you only share what was built during the relationship. If your matrimonial home is the same on the date you get married as the date that you separate, you in fact have to share the entire equity of that house, not just what was built while you were married. So if
Mhm.
you already own a home and your partner is moving into it, make sure you have something in place that protects the equity that you've built to date in that property.
That's really important, and a lot of people don't know that matrimonial home is an exception to that whole everything from the time we move in going forward is split. So I'm glad that you touched on that. So that was really helpful. Now, another question, two more questions that I get quite often about this stuff is, well, I don't know if I like, why would I need a prenup? That means I'm planning to break up, or I don't want that juju. So, what do you say to that?
Yeah, we get that comment a lot as family lawyers. Not so much the people who are coming to our office who already know and want that they want a prenup, but it comes up a lot in networking, at cocktail parties, and family dinners. Why would I get a prenup? Right? If I put that out into the universe, am I just inviting some sort of negativity into my relationship and asking for the separation to happen? And what I always tell people is that essentially everybody already has a marriage contract. When you get married, you are opting into a legal system
Mhm.
that is set out in the legislation that sets out your rights and your obligations as a spouse when you get married or when you move in with somebody and you've been living together long enough. The law puts on you those rights and
Mm.
obligations. So, what we tell people is that you might not need a marriage contract. You might not need a cohabitation agreement, but everyone should look at what the law says, understand what they're opting into. When you sign that marriage
Mhm.
license at your wedding, you are signing a legal contract.
Yeah.
Do you want those rights and obligations, or is something else going to work better for your family? So just having an understanding of that and opt into what the courts and society and government have said is fair, or create your own.
That's such a good line, whether you know it or not. When you sign that marriage paper, you are already entering a preset contract. And you're right, there's a lot of people who enter into it that don't understand what that is. And so, yeah, have a review, understand what that contract that's just given to you is. And if you don't like it, then yeah, you should be looking into a prenup where you can set your own rules, your own regulations with your partner. So that's good. Hey, are they bulletproof? That's my last question that I get from people all the time. Okay, great. So if I create this marriage contract or this prenup and protect my business and things like that, is it going to stand up?
I wish I could promise to every single client that every single contract you sign is bulletproof, but the reality is that much like any contract, a prenup, marriage contract, cohabitation agreement is not 100% ironclad. We as lawyers work to make sure that we are closing as many loopholes as possible, crossing the T's and dotting the I's to protect you. We do things like make sure that everyone has independent legal advice or the opportunity to get it. Everyone has financial disclosure, so they have full information to make an informed decision about the prenup. We make sure that nobody is being pressured into signing it or tricked in any way. Um, a simple example is people who come to us the week before the wedding and say, we need to sign this right now. And we're saying, whoa, hold your
Hold on.
horses,
Yeah.
slow down. That could put your whole contract at risk. Right? And
Interesting.
another thing that can put a contract at risk, even if it's been done, as tightly as possible, is that if your life diverts wildly from the expectations that you both had when you signed that contract, a judge might look at it and say, well, if you had known that this was going to happen, you might not have signed this contract.
Yeah.
So if life does go in an unexpected way, revisit the contract, right?
Mm.
If when you sign the contract, you're not planning on having children, you're planning your life to go a certain way, and then you change your mind or life throws a curveball and you do end up having kids, that might be something where a judge says, well, if you had known that one of you was going to stay home and raise children, or if you had known that one of you was going to fall ill or that a child was going to fall ill, perhaps you wouldn't have signed the contract this way. So much like whenever something significant happens in your life and you receive advice to revisit your estate plan or your financial plan, a marriage contract, a cohabitation agreement is part of your financial plan, and it should be looked at whenever something significant happens and make sure that it's still meeting everybody's goals and needs.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's kind of like a will. Every
Mhm.
few years, pull it, even best practice, every year, pull it out, do a quick
Yeah.
once over, right? Because, like you say, you might sign a will that has no mention of kids, and then
Mhm.
a surprise happens,
Yeah.
right? And it's just a good idea to just have a quick look over that
Yeah.
every year and make sure that the wish is in there. Or maybe, right, if there's something in there that's designated to, I don't know, a brother and you don't have a relationship with that brother anymore, you want to
Mhm.
update it. So it's the same idea. It's just
Yeah.
another contract that's part of your plan, like you say, and
Mhm.
it's not a set it and forget it. Just like a
No.
will, just like a financial plan, that needs to be reviewed regularly.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of another really important reason why people get a marriage contract put in place
Right?
is in the case of a blended family, if they have a second marriage and they want to protect their estate plan. So you
Mm.
put all this work and effort into putting together an estate plan to pass everything or the majority of your estate perhaps to your children from
Mhm.
your initial relationship. But a will is only an expression of your wishes, and your spouse at the time of your death has rights that they can assert over your estate, despite a will that says they're not to receive anything. So very commonly people do a marriage contract in a second marriage, a blended family, to protect their estate plan, to set out a contract that their spouse will not challenge that estate plan when they pass away.
That is amazing because you're just kind of doubling up to say, look, a will is one-sided. A prenup, we're going to back that up with a two-sided agreement where we're both saying the same thing, and it makes that will more bulletproof. Kind of like, if you want to pass on money to your children via a will, if you want
Mhm.
to have even greater control, greater certainty, you might consider a trust. So
Yes.
similar idea. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. You even slid in a couple little extras that I think are super valuable for the people who are watching. I really appreciate you joining me. Everyone, I'm going to throw Jennifer's information in the description below. That way, if you have any other questions for her, or you're thinking about having a prenup done or a marriage contract, or cohabitation agreement, if you're not legally married, feel free to reach out. She's got an open door policy. She'll have a chat with you and see what your options are and what might work best for you. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you joining me. All right,
My
everyone, have a good
pleasure.
day.